Toward the end of 2025, Russia claimed that it had scored a victory that was among the biggest that it enjoyed during the entire Ukraine war. The fortress city of Pokrovsk had fallen, Russia claimed, and the rest of Donetsk wouldn't be too far behind. Ukraine quickly proved this to be a lie, and the fighting that has raged in Pokrovsk for well over a year is still as intense as ever. If Russia has shown us anything in Ukraine, it's that intense fighting leads to it making bad decisions that result in its soldiers dying. That's exactly what Militani reported on January 6th, as Russia's soldiers walked into hell after falling into a perfect HIMARS trap that Ukraine's defenders set for them. Militani provides the bulk of the details covering what Ukraine just pulled off, though it credits a correspondent from the Ukrainian news station TSN, Yulia Kirienko, with revealing just how extensive Russia's latest Pokrovsk failure was. According to the outlet, Ukraine's artillery units were lying in wait for a Russian advance. Once the Russian soldiers, along with their equipment, came into range, Ukraine's defenders unleashed rockets from a HIMARS system to destroy the invaders and likely damage the equipment they were trying to move into Pokrovsk. This was no random counterattack. Ukraine's artillery group didn't rely on luck or just happen to be in position when the Russian forces attempted their advance. Rather, this was a calculated counterattack that was made possible by Ukraine's Skelia Regiment. Formerly known as the Skala Regiment, this unit has long served Ukraine in the field of reconnaissance. However, it offers far more than the eyes in the sky provided by drones to Ukraine. According to the regiment's own recruiting page, the Skelia team now combines its drone company with tank and artillery units, along with a training center through which it trains its own assault troops. It's unclear if the artillery unit that fired on the Russian forces near Pokrovsk was the same unit that the Skelia Regiment itself operates. However, we do know, per Militani, that it was a reconnaissance drone deployed by the Skelia Regiment that spotted the incoming Russian military convoy. With the convoy identified, Ukraine's artillery unit merely needed to adjust its fire accordingly, ensuring that the HIMARS rocket that it unleashed scored a direct hit against the Russian soldiers. Likely knowing how much disinformation is floating around concerning the situation in and around Pokrovsk, much of which has been created by Russia, Ukraine also filmed its HIMARS assault. Shared on the Militani YouTube page, the 44 seconds of footage offer an aerial view of the Russian convoy as it attempts to make its way down a snow-dusted road in the Pokrovsk direction. We hear talking in the background of the footage, then a sudden angle change at around the 12-second mark precedes the HIMARS rocket striking its target. The footage then cuts between several angles of the results of the strike, allowing us to see massive amounts of smoke rising into the air and what appear to be Russian vehicles or pieces of equipment that have been set on fire. Ukraine just needed a single rocket fired with high precision to get the job done, and that's why it chose HIMARS. As Sensor.net says in its report on Ukraine's HIMARS strike, this particular weapon was used to halt the prospective Pokrovsk invasion, both because it is highly precise and due to HIMARS making it possible for Ukraine to hit targets in the Russian rear. That appears to have been what happened here. The outlet says that Ukraine's strike took place somewhere between the settlements of Novopavlivka and Chinoshina, the former of which has been the site of fighting between Russia and Ukraine since at least November 2025. The specific spot that Ukraine struck is reportedly about 7 kilometers or about 4.3 miles away from the line of contact near Pokrovsk. This suggests that the destroyed Russian soldiers were transporting equipment and perhaps themselves to the front lines of a battle that Russia has previously claimed is over. The point here is that this seems to have been territory that Russia felt confident that it held. Ukraine used HIMARS to show Putin's forces that they're never safe, even in occupied portions of Ukraine. As for HIMARS itself, it was the perfect weapon for the job because of what its own name says that it is. HIMARS stands for High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, which means that the weapon that Ukraine chose to destroy Russian invaders near Pokrovsk is mobile and capable of delivering immense firepower. How strong that firepower is depends on the munitions chosen. HIMARS is capable of firing US-made ATACMS long-range missiles, though it's unlikely that these missiles were used in Ukraine's Pokrovsk strike. Ukraine wouldn't have needed the range that ATACMS provides, which Army technology reports to be between 165 and 300 kilometers, or 102 and 186 miles, depending on which ATACMS block is fired. Those missiles are better kept for deeper strikes into occupied territory, or perhaps in Russia itself. It's far more likely that Ukraine unleashed one of the HIMARS standard multiple-launch rocket system rounds at the Russian invaders. It also seems that Ukraine only needed one of the six-pack of rockets that Army recognition says a single HIMARS is capable of carrying, which only highlights just how effective the Skelia Regiment's reconnaissance was. There was no need for multiple rockets, at least based on the footage that has been shared of the attack. Russia's soldiers were grouped tightly enough together that a single, well-placed rocket could do all of the damage that Ukraine needed it to do. Ukraine was also able to respond so quickly to the data provided to it by its reconnaissance drone because the HIMARS vehicle is capable of traveling at speeds of up to 85 kilometers or around 52.8 miles per hour. So HIMARS had the speed, flexibility and firepower needed to stop the Russian convoy in its tracks. One rocket later, and that convoy was done for. Military reports that Ukraine's HIMARS strike left at least 10 Russian soldiers dead or seriously wounded. It also says that one piece of equipment that is seen in flames in the video that the outlet shared is likely an all-terrain vehicle, which Military says would have been completely destroyed by the fire. Shrapnel from the munitions used in the strike may also have damaged some of the other vehicles in the convoy, though that hasn't been confirmed. Not that it would matter, as the unit that operated those vehicles has been mostly wiped out. Ukraine may follow up with more strikes to take those vehicles out of commission or capture the vehicles for use by its own military. The latter is a common Ukrainian tactic. By September 2023, Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty was reporting that Ukraine had captured an estimated 500 Russian tanks since Putin launched his invasion. The number will likely be much larger now, and the potentially shrapnel-damaged vehicles between Novopavlivka and Chiashina may add to it. Possible vehicle captures are secondary to Ukraine, however. Its HIMARS strike was all about defending Pokrovsk in any way possible, and right now Ukraine is holding on to that city, forcing Russia into constant assaults that are costing Putin far more than the 10 or so soldiers that he lost in his January strike. The situation in Pokrovsk is fluid, but it certainly isn't what Putin and his cronies claimed it to be in December. On December 2nd, Al Jazeera reported that the Russian Chief of Staff, Valery Gerasimov, claimed that the city of Pokrovsk, which had been under Russian siege for almost 2 years at that point, had finally fallen. Gerasimov was reportedly so confident in his claim that the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov claimed that the Russian Chief of Staff had reported on the city's supposed liberation directly to Putin. Whether he believed Gerasimov or not, Putin was more than happy to maintain the line that Pokrovsk was under Russian control. Al Jazeera says he later addressed Russia's forces with a congratulatory message. "I want to thank you for the results of your work regarding Krasnoyarsk, both you and the entire command and personnel of the battle group," Putin said. The use of the name Krasnoyarsk may also have been intended to insult Ukraine, as this is the Russian name for Pokrovsk. Finally, it was done. The battle for a city that had cost Russia 100,000 of its soldiers between January and October 2025, per David Axe, along with the majority of around 25,000 Russian soldiers that Ukraine confirmed that its drone operators killed in October, had ended. Pokrovsk was under Russian control, meaning that Putin's forces could finally shift their focus to the rest of the Donetsk fortress belt that stood in the way of their claiming the entire oblast. But all was not as it seemed. It very soon became clear that Russia hadn't captured Pokrovsk at all. It still hasn't. Though Putin's forces now control the majority of Pokrovsk, as confirmed in a January 4th report by the Kyiv Independent, they don't hold all of the city. Ukraine claims that the fighting is ongoing and that its troops still hold key positions that are forcing Russia to launch constant and draining assaults. Russia also isn't as successful in taking the settlements that surround Pokrovsk as it claims. In the same report, the Kyiv Independent notes that Russia has claimed that it now occupies the town of Radinska, which is north of Pokrovsk and is another key battleground in the fight for Donetsk. That doesn't seem to be true either, at least according to Ukraine. Russian propaganda continues to spread false statements regarding the situation on the front line near the town of Radinska. Ukraine's air assault forces said in a Facebook post. Control over key positions is maintained. The enemy is suffering significant losses in manpower and equipment. The forces also claim that Russia has started sharing fabricated videos and manipulated reports to give the impression that Radinska has fallen. Where have we heard that before? Nah, of course. Russia used the same kinds of lies to claim that it had taken the city of Kupiansk in December too. We covered those lies and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's brilliant response to them in a video that revealed the truth about what's happening in Kupiansk. What we see here is a pattern of deliberate misinformation being presented by Russia to give the impression that its soldiers are storming through Ukraine's defenses. Putin is trying to project power, to convince the world of the inevitability of Russia's taking of Donetsk, and he's doing it because he wants to build leverage that he can use during the peace negotiations where he will argue that Ukraine should cede Donetsk, along with the rest of the Donbass. But what's really happening in Pokrovsk proves Russia's claims of capture wrong. Beyond the HIMARS strike that targeted Russia's soldiers and equipment heading toward the combat lines in a city that Russia says it captured, there have been several more recent examples of Ukraine repelling Russia's Pokrovsk invaders. On January 4th, Military reported that a Ukrainian MiG-29 Mu-1 had destroyed a bridge near Pokrovsk in a precision bomb strike. Russia's forces were using that bridge both as a logistical artery for troops and equipment that it was shuttling toward Pokrovsk, as well as for shelter for its units as they prepared their attacks. Ukraine used a pair of ASAM hammer bombs for the strike, which resulted in the complete destruction of the bridge and the likely slowdown of some of Russia's assaults on Pokrovsk. A day later, Militani also reported on the brave exploits of 2 soldiers from the Skelya Regiment, who managed to repel an attack involving 6 Russian troops inside Pokrovsk itself. These soldiers are from the very same regiment that operated the drone that made Ukraine's HIMARS strike possible, and they proved that members of the Skelya Regiment are just as effective on the ground as their drones are in the air. The defense saw Russia's soldiers quickly advance about 200 meters, or about 656 feet, in the direction of the pair of Skelya troops. 3 of the Russians were cut down almost immediately during the ensuing gunfight. After those Russians were down, 2 more approached, this time supported by a first-person view or FPV drone. But the defenders had an FPV drone of their own, and it eliminated one of the 2 attackers. The other, now left alone, was wounded in another gunfight before being finished off by Ukraine soldiers. More Ukrainian FPV drones rounded out the 6 casualties after discovering 1 more Russian soldier alive. And there's more. On January 7th, RBC Ukraine reported that Ukrainian forces had managed to shut down yet another Russian assault in the Pokrovsk direction. This time it was units of the 46th Separate Airmobile Podilya Brigade of the Air Assault Forces of Ukraine's armed forces that were responsible for an attack that cost Russia 65 soldiers, 59 of whom were killed, along with several tanks and armored vehicles. The Podilya paratroopers gave the unwelcome guests a warm welcome. Thanks to the coordinated efforts of our engineers, artillery units and drone teams, the enemy assault was successfully repelled, read a statement released by the brigade. These 3 incidents, along with Ukraine's HIMARS strike, demonstrate what's really happening in the Pokrovsk direction. Russia hasn't taken the city. Far from it, in fact, as Ukraine's defenders are costing Russia dozens of its soldiers in many of the assaults that they attempt. This isn't to say that Pokrovsk won't eventually fall. Russia controls most of the city and is pushing that advantage. But Ukraine's strategy at this point seems to be to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible before they're forced to evacuate. And once Pokrovsk falls, assuming that it falls at all, those retreating soldiers will be ready to welcome the Russian troops that attempt to take the Donetsk fortress belt. Despite these many successes, the situation in Pokrovsk isn't rosy. That was revealed in a January 5th report by the New Voice of Ukraine, which says that Putin's troops are stepping up the pressure near Pokrovsk. The outlet quotes Ukraine's armed forces, which cited the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces when saying, "Over the past 2 days, the enemy has continuously carried out assault operations in the area of the settlement of Rashina. During the attacks, the enemy has used manpower and light equipment. The assaults are mostly conducted at night to minimize their losses." Russia's forces are operating in groups of 6 or 8 soldiers, as we saw in the firefight between the duo of Skelya Regiment soldiers and 6 Russian invaders, and they're still attacking both Pokrovsk and the surrounding settlements in an attempt to encircle and take the city. But all of this means that Russia isn't in a much better position than it was before it made its grand claim to have captured Pokrovsk. Still, the city stands, as do many of the settlements that Russia is assaulting, the capture of which would make future attacks on Pokrovsk easier. So if that's the case, then why did Russia claim that it had captured Pokrovsk at all? It's about the leverage that we mentioned earlier. However, as the Times' Mark Bennett wrote on January 1st, it's also about Putin's belief that 2026 can be his year as long as he shows no signs of weakness. Putin is staring some uncomfortable milestones in the face, Bennett writes, not least of which is that January 12th will be the 1,418th day that Russia has spent trying to topple Ukraine. That's the precise number of days that the Soviet army needed to defeat Nazi Germany's troops, and it's a milestone that signifies a certain kind of weakness in a leader who has built his reputation on being Russia's strongman. Stalin's soldiers fought their way from the Volga River to the heart of Berlin, but Putin's army is still bogged down in the Donetsk town of Pokrovsk, an advance of around 30 miles since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started in 2022, Bennett writes. In a nation where that Soviet victory is a cornerstone of the national identity, the fact that Putin's forces have failed so dramatically to advance in any meaningful fashion in Ukraine is a humiliation for Putin. That's one of the reasons why Russia is claiming the capture of Pokrovsk, along with so many other settlements that it hasn't actually taken. Putin needs to create the illusion of progress to maintain his carefully crafted persona, both among the Russian people and the US negotiators with whom he is trying to hash out peace terms that are favorable to Russia. Incidents like Ukraine's HIMARS strike near Pokrovsk shatter the illusion that Putin wants to create. Putin is so blinded by his desire to appear as strong as possible that he's willing to let Russia's economy, along with its people, suffer as long as he doesn't look weak. That's according to Alexandra Prokopyenko, who is an analyst at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center as well as a former advisor at Russia's central bank. Putin has demonstrated a willingness to accept economic stagnation and declining living standards indefinitely. The Kremlin has prioritized war spending over everything else and shown it can manage unrest. Economic pain is a constraint, not a deal-breaker, Prokopyenko says, before adding, Putin isn't worried enough about protests. He's worried about appearing weak. Social discontent is real, but it's fragmented and directionless. There is no internal pressure on the Kremlin. If economics mattered, he'd already be negotiating. But the weakness is there, no matter how many lies that Russia tells about Pokrovsk and Donetsk. On January 6th, United 24 media reported that Russian officers are trying to flee the Pokrovsk front lines as morale collapses due to the heavy losses that Russia is suffering. Russia's advance through Donetsk is also so slow that it won't be completed until 2027 or 28, says the Institute for the Study of War Russia analysts Jessica Sobieski and Jenny Olmsted. These are not the types of reports we'd be hearing about if Russia were as strong as Putin tries to claim. Ukraine's task, then, is to carry on doing what it's doing in Pokrovsk. The city may well fall, but Ukraine is ensuring that Russia will lose many more of its soldiers and pieces of equipment before that happens. One well-placed HIMARS rocket a few miles outside of the city's borders is just a microcosm of a wider Ukrainian strategy that is designed to do one very important thing: prove to the world that Putin is a weak liar. That weakness is also being seen in Putin's failing ability to wield Russia's influence in global geopolitics. In Iran, a budding revolution is underway that may result in the collapse of a regime to which Putin has allied himself. Find out more about what's happening in Iran and what it might mean for Putin in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more updates on the latest events in Pokrovsk. And thank you as always for watching.